Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to kind of do a recap of everything that I've read so far this year, which happens coincidentally to have been the first quarter of the year. Over the last few years, I've really started to, accelerate in my reading. A few years ago, I read maybe 5-6 books in the whole year. And then the next year I read maybe 15, and then 30, and then last year I read 45. This year I'm on track to read about 60, which I know is still peanuts compared to a lot of the booktubers out there. For me, it's great. You know, the numbers don't matter. It's all about how much you love it. We're all here because we love books. So I should say that I do read mostly on my Kindle. Totally personal preference. So I don't actually own a lot of the books that I've read this year in a physical form, but I'm going to pull up the pictures on my iPad so that I can show you guys the covers anyways. So I've only got a stack of two that I own hard copies of that I've read this year, and it actually happens to be the first book I read this year and the most recent book I finished this year. So I'm going to start with both of those, and you may have seen them like hanging out right there. So the first book that I read this year was The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. I actually picked up this copy in October in St. Louis when I was on a trip there, visiting one of my lovely adult book club friends. And it is a signed first edition. I saw it. I had been wanting to read this for a really long time, like basically since before it came out last year. And obviously when I saw it and it was signed, and I was like, it's destiny, I gotta pick it up. And so I did, and then I just kept not getting around to it for a couple of months, but then I finally did, and there's something about this book that touched me. I'm actually planning to reread it in April. I'm doing a whole like rereadathon this month. As soon as I finish the book that I'm on, I'm just going to go back and reread some of my favorites, and also ones that are part of series that have new books coming out in May. I'm also going to reread this because I loved it so much. It was one of those books that I read exactly when I needed to read it. And it helped me through a really rough moment in my life, and I will be forever grateful to Patrick Ness for this specific book. I did read A Monster Calls right before I read this, and I loved that so much is why I finally ended up picking this up. And I am really looking forward to reading the Chaos Walking series. I think I have the first and the third book in that series, so I need to pick up the second one still. But I'm really looking forward to that and continuing exploring the world of Patrick Ness. The actually most recent book that I finished this year was I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. A bunch of the girls in Adult Bookler just rave about this book, and now I understand why. This is hands down, without a doubt, no holds barred, my favorite book that I have ever read in my entire life. Every single thing about it is gorgeous. Every single thing about it speaks to me. Every single thing about this book is just pure perfection, and I have never found that before, and I will probably collect every edition of this book that ever goes to print in English. It's so good. I've already purchased 4 extra copies and given them away to loved ones. I've also talked at least 4 other people into purchasing it for themselves. It's only like $6 on Amazon right now, so I highly recommend it. I don't want to give a synopsis at all because anything can be a spoiler at this point. It's about a pair of twins. It's told from both perspectives. The boy twin tells the story when they're 13 years old, and the girl twin tells the story when they're 16 years old. Between the two stories, so you're really only getting half of the story each time, but everything starts to fall together, and it's one of those like just beautifully crafted stories, and the narrative, everything just falls together perfectly. Ugh, I love it. I love it so much. The next book that I read this year, after The Rest of Us Just Live Here, was The Duff by Cody Keplinger. And this is actually one that I read last year, and I thought it was so cute. I wanted to read it before I watched the movie, and I really love the book. I thought it was so cute. It was real, and it was, you know, it didn't feel like it was pandering to teenagers. It was things that teenagers actually experienced. There were real world problems, and it wasn't just like this petty, fluffy junk. I was really disappointed in the movie. The movie on its own, as a standalone movie, pretty cute, whatever, just your like typical teeny whatever. As an adaptation of this book, the movie is maybe one of the most disappointing films I've ever seen in my life. That maybe is a topic for another video altogether, but holy crap. They could not have done less justice to this book with a film if they had, like, literally shat on it. There is nothing of the book in the movie. So anybody who's seen the movie and maybe doesn't want to read the book, or anybody who maybe loved the movie and wants to read the book, you might be disappointed, because the book is it's a lot more intense. It's so good. I mean, I've read it twice already, and I really don't devote a lot of time to rereading books. It might not seem that way considering that I'm devoting an entire month to rereading books, but I don't reread that many books. Like, I don't reread hardly at all. The Duff is great. I love it so much. I highly recommend it to anybody who really loves contemporary YA. I'm really looking forward to reading other books by Cody Keplinger. I've heard that Lying Out Loud is pretty good, and it's a completely different story that's not actually related, but it does contain some of the same characters as in The Duff. So yeah, I think I'll pick that up at some point when my TBR isn't like 900 bajillion books long. Yeah. Okay. The next book that I read this year was Shatter Me by Tahereh Mafi. And I actually read all the books and novellas in this series because, holy crap, could not put these down. I think I read the entire series in a week, which is really, really fast for me. I do read pretty slow, and I don't spend a lot of time in a week reading. Just mom. Mom life. Not a lot of time for that. I had seen some Tumblr posts with excerpts from the book, and I was reading them, and I was like, what is this? I need this in my life. The writing is so beautiful, and I know that there's like a strikeouts feature, because it's an internal monologue from the main character's perspective, and you know, we all do it. We think things, and then we're like, no, and then we revise what we're thinking, and that is how it's written, and it's so unique, and it's so great. And a lot of people actually had take issue with the strikeouts in the book, and I just thought that they added another level to the character, so you can see the things that she's filtering from her thoughts. It was really, really cool, and not to mention just so poetic and so beautiful without being like super flowery and kind of boring, because sometimes all that descriptive poetic language can kind of muddle the story, and that never happened with this book. So I loved the whole series. I plowed right through it, and I will probably revisit it at some point. I'm really excited to hear that it has been optioned for a TV series, I think by ABC. So I'm usually pretty wary about adaptations based on, you know, some of the debacles that we've been given lately, but I think for this one, I think they could do it really well. I like to call this one Dystopian X-Men, because that's what it is, and it's freaking awesome. If you haven't read it, read it. It's amazing. Okay, the next book that I read this year was the original Siren from the 2009 edition by Kira Cass. I read this right before the new 2016 edition was released. The next book that I read was actually the 2016 edition, and I wanted to know how different they were, so I read them back to back. And I was not expecting them to be as different as they are. I mean, Kira just took the whole story, rewrote the whole thing. Like, the entire thing got rewritten. I will tell you that I connected more to the original story than the new one. The new one felt much fluffier. It felt more in line with, like, the selection books. You know, it's more lighthearted and more hopeful and just has that kind of like, I don't know, it's like a sparkle to it. So the new edition has those elements. The original is so beautiful. It is poignant. It is much longer. You get to take your time to like meet the characters. The main character in this book's name is Kaylin, and she is clearly a siren. When I was reading the original edition, it took me a long time to connect with Kaylin. I was honestly a little frustrated with how slowly the plot was moving. But by the time we got to the climax, I was so grateful for everything that, like, for all of the groundwork that Kiera Cass had laid at the beginning of the book. And I understand why they changed it all. That's not really something that goes over well in the YA genre, which is how this book is marketed. I would be really interested to know how much that influence was Kiera deciding those changes needed to be made and how much of it was her publisher deciding that those changes needed to be made. I think that that would be a really, really interesting like comparison just to see kind of the experience of an author. Anyways, that's a different story. So the original is beautiful. It's much longer. It's much more poignant, much more poetic. Things just it breathes. You know, it takes a minute and you get to feel everything in the story. And the new one just kind of, it just kind of clipped along and it told you the story, but you didn't get nearly as much of the emotion or the raw connection that you got out of the original. So I will say, anybody wanting to read The Siren, I highly recommend the 2009 original edition. I don't even know where you can get it anymore. I know it's out of print because it was independently published and now it's published by Harper Teen. So I don't know where you might be able to get your hands on it, but I promise you it's so worth it. It is beautiful. It was maybe 500 pages, so it wasn't like an exceedingly long book, but it is much longer than what I think the new one came out to, like 320 pages or something, so she clipped it down a lot. I mean, she changed some of the characters and their personalities and their motives, and like it was so different. So different. I would love to do a comparison video of those two books for you guys sometimes. If you're interested in that, let me know down in the comments and I got your back. The next book that I read this year, it was actually another reread. So remember that time that I told you that I don't reread a lot of books? Apparently that was a complete and utter lie. Shh. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is one that I, like many of us, read in high school as required reading, and I hated it. I hated it. It was so boring. I didn't understand what it was talking about. I had no idea why I should care about these fancy people and their fancy parties. But then, before the Baz Luhrmann movie came out, I read it, so that was, shoot, what year was that? 2012 maybe? I reread the book before the movie came out and it was just like, phew. I was obsessed with it. I have now read it 4 additional times after that. I love it so much. I actually struggled through it this time. I think I'm just really like not in the mood for that style right now. The things that have been getting me hooked more are like the YA fantasies right now. I just love them. I love them so much. The next book that I read this year was An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. She is going to be at BookCon this year, so I will get to see her there, and I am so excited. I read An Ember in the Ashes on the recommendation of a very close friend of mine who would not stop talking about it. Not ever. I got through it really fast. I don't know that it's been my favorite that I've read this year. It was very interesting. I felt like the ending was too loose, even for a series. Like, you know how in a series, every book still kind of ties up its own ends. I don't feel like I got that out of this book. So I'm sure that the duology as a whole, when it's complete, is going to be phenomenal, because the story was told really well and it was really interesting and I really enjoyed it. But that book on its own, super unsatisfying for me personally. I wish that I had waited until the second book was out and then I could have just read them both together, because reading that one and then waiting, and it's not the same kind of thing where like Throne of Glass, like I finished Queen of Shadows and I was just like, give me the next one now. You know that feeling. I know you do. It wasn't that feeling. It was like, that's the end? Okay. Put the book down. Pick up another one. There was no book hangover with this book, which I suppose was good. I didn't feel guilty moving on. I don't know. It was weird. It was a weird feeling that it left me with, and it's undescribable. If you haven't read it, I do highly recommend reading it, but maybe wait until the second one's out. The next book I read was... yeah, that just happened. Me Before You by Jojo Moyes? Is that how you say her last name? I'm not really sure. It's being turned into a movie, and the trailers have come out, and honestly, they kind of give away the whole story in the trailer. So I don't really know what they're doing there with their lives. But it does look really good. A few of my friends and I decided that we were going to read the book before we saw the movie, as one does. And I really enjoyed it. It was an adult contemporary, which is not a genre that I read, like, ever. It was definitely a different experience, you know. It was nice to be grounded in the real world for a change, instead of like these fantasy worlds where 7 of the 10 books that I've read so far this year have been set in a fantasy world. Sometimes it's nice to read something that's not. It's really refreshing and cleanses the palate for all of the fantasy fantasy is my favorite genre. Adult fantasy, YA fantasy, whatever. Fantasy is my favorite genre. But it's nice to get that palate cleanse. So I really enjoyed the book. I didn't swoon over it the way that everybody else did. I don't know that it affected me the way that all of my friends were affected by it. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe I was just like guarding myself the whole time I was reading it, because it is like a heartbreaking story. So I don't really know why that is. I definitely enjoyed reading it. I definitely see the appeal of the story. The writing was great. The characters were lovable. You know, all those things that you want in a book. It just didn't click for me. I still gave it, I think, 4 stars. If Goodreads had half-star options, I probably would give it 4.5 stars, because it was well crafted. It was well done. I very much, appreciated it for what it is. It was just missing that little piece that, attaches itself to my heart. I probably will recommend it to people who are looking for adult contemporary, because I think it is a great, example of that genre. But, again, for me, So, apparently my fancy camera only takes 25-minute clips. So that's the thing. I had told you guys everything that I've read the first quarter of this year. And then I was going to go through also that I'm currently reading Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. And I picked this up because she's going to be at BookCon and I would very much like to meet her. And obviously the Grisha trilogy has done very well, and everybody I know that loves the Grisha trilogy has said that Six of Crows is even better. Who doesn't want to read Ocean's 11 set in a fantasy setting? I definitely do, and I like it a lot. So in April, I am doing a reread-a-thon. I think I said that already. I am rereading, well, mostly I'm rereading books that have new books coming out. So I'll be going through the beautiful Happily Ever After short story collection from Kira Cass in the selection series. And it's also got some, gorgeous illustrations and extra content. It's amazing. I love this. I haven't actually read this yet, so I'm excited to do that. But everything else I'm going to reread The Air. I'm going to reread A Court of Thorns and Roses before A Court of Mist and Fury comes out. I'll reread The Wrath and the Dawn before The Rose and the Dagger comes out. I have actually been following the novellas that Renee Ahdieh has been putting out. The Moth and the Flame was the most recent one. The first one was The Crown and the Arrow. And those are both fantastic. Getting myself back into that world, like, The Wrath and the Dawn was definitely one of my favorite books I read last year. Like I said, I'm going to reread Patrick Ness's The Rest of Us Just Live Here because that book was phenomenal and touched me so deeply. And then also, Adult Bookler is reading Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children as part of our April page to screen theme. So we're doing that, and Neil Gaiman's Sandman. And so I'll be reading both of those as well for those read-alongs. But otherwise, we're just going to stick to the rereads. Actually, I've already read Miss Peregrine, so technically that falls into my rereadathon for April. So I got lucky there when the voting happened to turn out a book that I had already read and loved. Ransom Riggs, so good. Love it so much. That's all I've got for tonight. I'm super tired. I'm going to get this shit edited and get it up. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe, comment, all of those kinds of things. If you want to follow along with any of our Adult Bookler read-alongs, I will put the links in the comment box for that, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye!